I never thought a 7-year-old could destroy a man's world with just one sentence, but that's exactly what happened to me on what was supposed to be the best weekend of our summer. We'd driven up to Silver Pine Resort on Friday afternoon, Claire singing along to the radio while I focused on the winding mountain roads. The kids were excited in the back seat, Mia chattering about the lake and Lucas clutching his stuffed dinosaur. This was going to be our family time, Claire had insisted. No work calls, no distractions, just us reconnecting as a family. The resort was everything the brochure promised. Tall pine trees surrounded a crystal-clear lake, and our cabin sat right on the water's edge with a perfect view of the sunset. I remember thinking this was exactly what we needed. Claire and I had been distant lately, both of us buried in work and responsibilities. Maybe this weekend would fix whatever was broken between us. Saturday went perfectly. We rented a paddle boat and took the kids out on the lake. Claire laughed at my terrible jokes, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. We had dinner at the resort restaurant, where Mia insisted on ordering the biggest burger on the menu and Lucas spilled chocolate milk all over his shirt. Just regular family stuff that felt precious in hindsight. But something was off. Claire kept checking her phone, claiming it was work emergencies. She'd step away to take calls, speaking in hushed tones by the cabin's back deck. When I asked about it, she'd just wave me off and say it was nothing important. Her phone buzzed constantly during dinner, and she'd glance at it with this little smile I'd never seen before. Sunday night, I was tucking Mia into bed in the cabin's small back bedroom. She'd brushed her teeth and put on her favorite pajamas with the cartoon cats. I was reading her usual bedtime story when she interrupted me mid-sentence. "Daddy, why does Mommy have a secret boyfriend?" The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I actually felt dizzy for a second, like the room was spinning. I set the book down carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I heard her talking to him on the phone, Mia said matter-of-factly, the way kids do when they don't understand they've just dropped a bomb. She called him Jordan and said she missed him. She was giggling like when she talks to Grandma about funny movies. My hands started shaking. I tried to process what she was telling me, but my brain felt like it was moving through thick mud. Jordan. I knew that name. Jordan Keller, the city council member who'd been making noise about local business regulations lately. "When did you hear this, Mia?" "Lots of times. Yesterday when you were getting ice from the machine. And today when you were helping Lucas with his fishing pole. She always goes outside to talk to him." I kissed Mia's forehead, told her everything was fine, and somehow managed to finish the bedtime story. But inside, I was falling apart. After she fell asleep, I went looking for answers. Claire was on the back deck, and sure enough, she was on her phone. I crept close enough to the window to hear fragments of conversation through the glass. "Can't wait to see you Tuesday. Ethan doesn't suspect anything." After the custody arrangement. Custody arrangement. Those words froze my blood. This wasn't just an affair. This was something planned, something bigger. I spent the next hour going through Claire's things while she was in the shower. I'm not proud of it, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. Her phone was locked, but she'd left her laptop open on the bed. The messages I found made me sick. Months of conversations with Jordan Keller. Plans for divorcing me. Discussions about taking the kids. But worse than that were the business references I didn't understand. My company's name came up repeatedly, along with mentions of audits and regulatory pressure. They weren't just planning to destroy my marriage. They were planning to destroy everything. I sat there in that cabin bedroom, surrounded by the debris of my life, trying to figure out what to do next. Claire was still in the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. The kids were both asleep. Outside, the lake was perfectly calm under the moonlight, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I packed our stuff as quietly as I could. Just mine and the kids' things. I woke up Mia first, whispering that we were going on an adventure. She was groggy but excited. Lucas was harder to wake, but I managed to get him dressed and into the car without too much fuss. I left Claire a note on the kitchen counter, taking the kids home early. "We need to talk." The drive to my grandfather's old cabin took 2 hours through dark mountain roads. Both kids fell back to sleep in their car seats, and I drove in silence, trying to process what I'd learned. Every mile felt like I was putting distance between my children and danger, though I couldn't yet understand what that danger really was. The cabin sat on a smaller lake about 50 miles from Silver Pine Resort. I'd inherited it from my grandfather 5 years ago but rarely used it. Tonight, it felt like salvation. A place where I could think clearly and figure out how to protect my family from whatever was coming. I carried both kids inside and tucked them into the bunk beds in the back room. They barely stirred. Then I sat at the old wooden table in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of pine and old memories, and tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. By dawn, Claire had called 17 times and sent dozens of text messages. I didn't answer any of them. I needed time to think, time to plan, and time to figure out who I could trust in the battle that was clearly coming. The sun was barely up when I called Carlos. My hands were still shaking from everything that had happened at Silver Pine Resort, but I knew I couldn't handle this alone. Carlos Martinez had been my business partner for 3 years before he moved to Denver to start his own firm. More importantly, he was the only person I trusted completely. Ethan? It's 6 in the morning, man. What's going on? I told him everything. About Mia's innocent question, about the phone calls I'd overheard, about the messages on Claire's laptop mentioning my business. Carlos listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always appreciated about him. He didn't jump to conclusions or offer easy answers. Where are you now? He asked when I finished. Grandpa's old cabin up at Pine Lake. I've got the kids with me. Good. Stay there. I'm driving up today. While I waited for Carlos, I tried to make sense of the documents I'd photographed from Claire's laptop before leaving the resort. The business references were scattered throughout her messages with Jordan, but they painted a disturbing picture. They mentioned regulatory pressure and audit triggers like they were discussing the weather. My marketing firm wasn't huge, but it was solid. I'd built it from nothing over 8 years, focusing on small businesses and local campaigns. We had 12 employees and annual revenue of about $2 million. Nothing that should attract political attention, unless someone wanted it gone for other reasons. The kids woke up around 9, confused about why we were at the cabin instead of home. I made pancakes on the old gas stove and told them we were having an extended camping trip. Mia bought it completely, but Lucas kept asking for his mommy. Each question felt like a knife twist. Carlos arrived just after lunch, and he didn't come alone. The woman with him was about 40, dressed casually but carrying herself like she meant business. Short brown hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that made you pay attention. This is Harper Reed, Carlos said. She specializes in corporate investigations. I called her on the drive up. Harper shook my hand with a firm grip. Carlos filled me in on the basics. Before we go any further, I need to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes the rabbit hole goes deeper than you expect. I looked at my kids playing by the lake through the cabin window. I just want to protect my family and my business. Whatever it takes. Harper nodded and pulled out a tablet. Let's start with what you already know. We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Harper asked detailed questions about my business operations, recent contracts, any unusual interactions with government agencies. Carlos focused on the financial side, reviewing my company's books on his laptop. Tell me about the Morrison account, Harper said, reading from her notes. Big contract we landed 6 months ago. Marketing campaign for their new retail development. Why? Because according to what you showed me from Claire's messages, Morrison was specifically mentioned. So was the Hendricks Group contract from last spring. My stomach dropped. Both of those were major accounts, representing about 40% of my annual revenue. What did the messages say? Harper pulled up the photos I'd taken. Jordan mentions pressure points and compliance issues related to both contracts. There's also a reference to triggering review processes. Carlos looked up from his laptop. Ethan, when was the last time you had a state audit? Never. Small firms like mine usually don't get audited unless there's a specific complaint. Well, you might want to prepare for one. I'm seeing some irregularities in your recent filings that weren't there before. What kind of irregularities? Documentation that doesn't match what I helped you prepare. Signatures that look off. Contract amendments you didn't make. The room felt like it was getting smaller. Are you saying someone's been messing with my files? I'm saying someone with access to official systems has been creating a paper trail that makes your business look questionable, Carlos said. The kind of trail that would justify an investigation. Harper was typing rapidly on her tablet. Jordan Keller sits on the Regulatory Oversight Committee. He has influence over which businesses get scrutinized and which don't. If he wanted to create problems for your company, he'd know exactly how to do it. Over the next hour, the picture became clearer and more frightening. Someone had been systematically building a case against my business for months. Forged contract amendments that violated municipal advertising regulations. Fake invoices that suggested tax evasion. Documentation that painted me as either incompetent or criminal. This isn't just about an affair, I said, staring at the evidence spread across the cabin's kitchen table. This is about destroying me completely. Personal and professional, Harper agreed. Classic strategy. Discredit you as a husband and father, then destroy your livelihood. By the time they're done, you'd have no resources to fight back and no credibility if you tried. Carlos closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. We need to start building defenses immediately. Financial, legal, and personal. What does that mean? It means we secure your business records before they can be altered further. We document everything we've found. We get you a lawyer who specializes in this kind of political targeting. And we make sure your kids are protected if this gets ugly. Harper was already making calls. Within an hour, she'd arranged for a forensic accountant to examine my books and a security expert to check my office for surveillance equipment. She also recommended a lawyer in the city who had experience with cases involving political corruption. What about Claire? I asked. She's been calling nonstop. Don't engage yet, Harper advised. Every conversation with her could be recorded. Every text message could be used against you later. We need to control the narrative. As evening approached, I realized how completely my life had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I was a married businessman taking his family on vacation. Now I was a single father hiding at a remote cabin, planning defenses against people who wanted to destroy everything I'd built. Carlos helped me set up secure communication channels and showed me how to back up my business files to encrypted storage. Harper walked me through operational security basics, varying my routines, checking for surveillance, keeping detailed records of every interaction. This feels like something out of a movie, I said as we finished our preparations. Unfortunately, it's not, Harper replied. Political corruption is more common than people think. You just usually don't see it unless you're the target. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat on the cabin's front porch with Carlos and Harper, watching the lake reflect the stars. The peaceful setting felt surreal considering what we'd uncovered during the day. What happens next? I asked. We fight, Carlos said simply. But we fight smart. We gather evidence, build alliances, and make sure they can't claim you're just a bitter husband making wild accusations. Harper nodded. The key is staying ahead of their moves while documenting everything they've already done. They think you're isolated and vulnerable. Let's prove them wrong. As I went to bed that night, listening to my children breathing peacefully in the next room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Not confidence exactly, but determination. I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't going to let them destroy my family or my life's work without a fight. Harper's phone rang at 7 in the morning, 3 days after she'd started digging into my business records. I was making coffee in the cabin kitchen when I heard her sharp intake of breath from the living room. You need to see this, she called out. Carlos was already awake, reviewing financial documents at the kitchen table. We'd been working around the clock, and the evidence was starting to paint a picture that made my stomach turn. What we discovered went way beyond anything I'd imagined. The forensic accountant found something, Harper said, setting her laptop on the table. Your business accounts show regular transfers to shell companies over the past 8 months. Small amounts, designed to look like routine vendor payments. I stared at the screen. I never authorized any of those transfers. I know. But the authorization documents exist, complete with your forged signature. Someone with access to your banking information has been systematically draining your accounts. Carlos pulled up another set of files. It gets worse. Those shell companies? They all trace back to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. And guess whose name appears as a beneficiary on several of them? He turned his screen toward me. There it was, clear as day, Clary Walker listed as an authorized recipient on 3 different financial instruments. My wife had been stealing from my own company. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. About $40,000 so far, Harper said. But it's not really about the money. It's about creating a pattern of financial irregularities that would justify a full audit and investigation. Which brings us to the bigger problem, Carlos added. He'd been working with a contact at the state regulatory office, someone who owed him a favor from years back. There's already an audit scheduled for your company. Next week. My coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the cabin floor. Based on what? Anonymous complaint filed 6 weeks ago alleging tax evasion and contract violations. The complaint included detailed financial records that supposedly came from a concerned employee. I don't have any employees who would do that. No, but you have a wife with access to your office and files, Harper said grimly. The kids were still asleep in the back room, and I was grateful they couldn't hear this conversation. Every revelation felt like another weight added to my chest, making it harder to breathe. Harper had been busy overnight, tracing connections through public records and corporate filings. What she'd found was a web of corruption that reached much further than I'd expected. Jordan Keller isn't the mastermind here, she said, pulling up a complex chart on her tablet. He's just the political muscle. The real power behind this operation is your father-in-law, Henry Caldwell. I should have seen it coming. Claire's father had never liked me, never thought I was good enough for his daughter. But I'd never imagined he'd go this far. Caldwell owns 18 different shell companies, Harper continued. Most of them are fronts for real estate acquisitions. He specializes in buying distressed properties and small businesses at below-market prices. Let me guess, I said. Businesses that have been driven into financial trouble by mysterious regulatory problems. Exactly. Your marketing firm isn't his first target. Over the past 5 years, he's acquired 7 small companies through similar methods. Create regulatory pressure, trigger investigations, force the owners into bankruptcy, then swoop in with cash offers. Carlos had been running financial projections on his laptop. If they succeed in destroying your business, Caldwell's company would likely acquire your client contracts and office lease for pennies on the dollar. Your biggest clients would probably end up working with his marketing subsidiary. He has a marketing subsidiary? Caldwell Promotional Services. Incorporated just 6 months ago. The timing wasn't coincidental. They've been planning this for at least half a year, maybe longer. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every time Henry Caldwell had asked about my business, he'd been gathering intelligence. Harper's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, then looked up with a grim expression. My contact at the banking commission just confirmed something troubling. The audit against your company includes allegations of money laundering, based on those suspicious transfers we found. Money laundering? That's a federal crime. Which means federal investigators, not just state auditors. They're not just trying to destroy your business, Ethan. They're trying to put you in prison. I had to sit down. The scope of the conspiracy was overwhelming. It wasn't just about Claire wanting a divorce or Jordan Keller wanting to eliminate a potential business rival. This was a coordinated campaign to completely destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. There's more, Carlos said quietly. He'd been going through the forged documents with a magnifying glass, literally. These fake invoices and contract amendments? They're too perfect. Professional-grade forgeries that would cost serious money to produce. Caldwell has those kinds of resources, Harper noted. He's worth about $50 million according to public filings. He could easily afford to hire experts. But why go to all this trouble? I asked. If he wanted to destroy me, there had to be easier ways. Harper pulled up a map on her tablet, showing property ownership in our area. Because your business sits on prime real estate that he wants for a development project. The building you lease, plus the 2 adjacent properties, would be perfect for a mixed-use complex he's been planning. How do you know about his development plans? City Planning Commission records. He filed preliminary inquiries 8 months ago for a project called Pine Valley Commons. The proposed location exactly matches where your office building stands. Everything clicked into place. The affair with Jordan Keller gave Claire access to political influence. The financial manipulation created justification for federal investigation. The forged documents ensured I'd be too busy fighting criminal charges to defend my business. And Henry Caldwell would end up with both my company's assets and the real estate he wanted for his development project. It's brilliant, I admitted reluctantly. Completely evil, but brilliant. The good news, Harper said, is that we now understand their strategy, which means we can start building a defense. She'd already been in contact with a federal defense attorney who specialized in white-collar cases. More importantly, she'd found evidence that several of Caldwell's previous acquisitions followed similar patterns. We're not just fighting for your business, she explained. We're potentially exposing a pattern of criminal behavior that's been going on for years. Carlos closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? Because once we start fighting back publicly, there's no going back. They'll throw everything they have at you. I thought about my kids, still asleep in the next room. I thought about the employees at my company who depended on their jobs. I thought about all the other small business owners who might be future targets if Caldwell's scheme wasn't stopped. Let's do it, I said. Let's take these bastards down. Harper smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Good. Because I've already started making calls. By tomorrow, we'll have federal investigators looking into Caldwell's business practices and Jordan Keller's abuse of political authority. What about Claire? She's going to have some very difficult questions to answer about those offshore accounts and forged authorizations. Banking fraud is a serious federal crime. As I sat there in my grandfather's cabin, Surrounded by evidence of the conspiracy against me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Not quite confidence, but a sense of purpose. They'd made one critical mistake in their elaborate plan. They'd underestimated how far I'd go to protect my family and my life's work. Harper found me sitting on the cabin's dock at sunrise, watching the mist rise off Pine Lake. I'd been out there for 2 hours, trying to process what she'd told me the night before. Some truths are too big to absorb all at once. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her without turning around. About Lucas. She sat down beside me on the weathered wooden planks. I know it's a lot to take in. The paternity test results were in Harper's folder, along with medical records she'd somehow obtained through her investigative contacts. Lucas wasn't my biological son. The timing lined up perfectly with when Claire's affair with Jordan Keller had started, 3.5 years ago. He's still my boy, I said firmly. DNA doesn't change that. I know. But Claire and Jordan are going to use this information as a weapon. They're already claiming you're emotionally unstable because you took the kids without permission. I'd been ignoring Claire's calls for a week now. According to Carlos, she'd already hired a lawyer and was threatening legal action. The emergency custody petition had been filed yesterday, painting me as an unfit father who'd kidnapped his own children. How did you figure it out? I asked Harper. Medical insurance claims. Lucas had some routine blood work done last year, and the lab results showed a blood type that wasn't consistent with you being his father. Claire requested the records be sealed, which made me suspicious. The worst part wasn't learning that Lucas wasn't biologically mine. The worst part was realizing that Claire had lied to me for over 3 years, every single day. Every time I looked at Lucas and seen my father's eyes or my grandmother's smile, I'd been seeing what I wanted to see. Carlos emerged from the cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee and his laptop. We need to talk strategy, he said, settling into one of the old wooden chairs. The custody hearing is scheduled for Thursday. That's only 4 days away. Emergency hearings move fast. Claire's lawyer is claiming you're having a mental breakdown and pose a danger to the children. I almost laughed at the absurdity. A danger? I'm the one who's been protecting them. I know that, and you know that, but family court judges err on the side of caution, especially when one parent disappears with the kids for a week without explanation. Harper opened her folder and spread documents across the small table. We need to build a comprehensive defense, not just against the custody petition, but against everything they're going to throw at you. Over the next hour, we developed a plan that felt like preparing for war. Harper had been busy documenting everything we'd discovered about the conspiracy. Bank records showing the unauthorized transfers. Corporate filings linking Henry Caldwell to the shell companies. Audio recordings of Claire's phone conversations that I'd managed to capture before leaving Silver Pine Resort. The recordings are our strongest evidence, Harper explained. They show clear premeditation and conspiracy. But we need more. What kind of more? Sworn affidavits from people who witnessed suspicious behavior. Documentation of Jordan Keller's abuse of his position. Evidence that Caldwell has used similar tactics against other businesses. Carlos had been working his network of contacts in the business community. I found 3 other companies that were targeted by mysterious audits after crossing paths with Caldwell development projects. 2 of them eventually sold to his shell companies. Will they testify? Maybe. If they understand that stopping Caldwell helps protect other small businesses from the same fate. The sound of children's voices drifted from the cabin. Mia and Lucas were awake, probably wondering where the adults had gone. I felt a stab of guilt for dragging them into this mess, even though I'd had no choice. What about the custody hearing? I asked. Harper pulled out another set of documents. We're going to be completely transparent. Present evidence of the conspiracy, explain why you felt the children were in danger, and demonstrate that you're a stable, loving father who is protecting his family. Even though Lucas isn't biologically mine? Especially because of that. You've been his father for 4 years. You've supported him, loved him, been there for every milestone. Biology doesn't erase that bond. Carlos was typing rapidly on his laptop. I'm documenting every interaction you've had with both kids since this started. The morning pancakes, the fishing trips, the bedtime stories. We're going to show the court that you're providing a stable, nurturing environment. What if they take the kids away? Harper's expression was serious but not defeated. Then we appeal immediately and keep fighting. But I don't think it'll come to that. Family court judges see a lot of cases, and they're pretty good at recognizing genuine parental love versus manipulation. Over the next 3 days, we worked around the clock preparing for the hearing. Harper interviewed potential witnesses via video call. Carlos compiled financial records that proved my stability as a provider. I wrote detailed accounts of every conversation I'd had with the children, every concern I'd had about Claire's behavior, every reason I'd felt compelled to protect them. The hardest part was the conversation with Lucas. He kept asking when Mommy was coming to the cabin, and I had to find age-appropriate ways to explain that families sometimes change. Mia was more perceptive, asking direct questions about why we'd left the resort so suddenly. "Is Mommy in trouble?" she asked while we were skipping stones on the lake. "Mommy made some choices that weren't good for our family," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Do you still love Mommy?" That was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that love and trust are different things, and that sometimes people you love can hurt you in ways that change everything? "I love who Mommy used to be," I said finally. "But people sometimes change in ways that make it hard to stay together." On Wednesday night, the evening before the custody hearing, Harper delivered news that changed everything. "I found another recording," she said, connecting her phone to the cabin's Bluetooth speaker. "This one is from 3 weeks ago, before your trip to Silver Pine Resort." Claire's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the speaker. "Once the custody arrangement is finalized and Ethan's business is destroyed, we can move forward with the development project. Daddy's already identified buyers for the assets." Jordan Keller's voice responded, "What about the kids? Ethan's not going to just disappear. He won't have a choice. Between the federal charges and losing custody, he'll be lucky to get supervised visits once a month." The recording continued for another 10 minutes, detailing their plans with shocking callousness. They discussed my children like assets to be managed, my business like a problem to be solved. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Security camera audio from the restaurant where they met. The owner is a client of mine, and she was suspicious about their regular meetings. She's willing to testify about what she observed." Carlos closed his laptop and looked at me with something approaching admiration. "You know what this means, right? That they're even worse than we thought? That we've got them dead to rights. This recording proves conspiracy, demonstrates their motives, and shows they've been planning to separate you from your children as part of a broader criminal scheme." That night, I barely managed to close my eyes. In less than 12 hours, I'd be sitting in a courtroom fighting for the right to continue being a father to the children I'd raised and loved. The biological revelation about Lucas still stung, but Harper was right. DNA didn't define fatherhood. Love, commitment, and daily care did. As I listened to both kids breathing peacefully in the next room, I made a promise to myself and to them. No matter what happened in court, no matter what other revelations came to light, I would never stop fighting to protect them and provide them with the stability they deserved. The truth was finally coming out, and I was ready to face whatever consequences that brought. Margot Ellis was everything Harper had promised when she recommended her: sharp, fearless, and expensive as hell. But sitting across from her in her downtown office, watching her tear apart Claire's custody petition line by line, I knew every penny would be worth it. "They made a critical error," Margot said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the court documents. "Filing an emergency petition based on claims of mental instability without providing any medical evidence or witness testimony. It's sloppy work. What does that mean for us? It means we go on the offensive immediately. I'm filing a counterpetition for full custody based on documented evidence of parental misconduct and criminal conspiracy." The custody hearing had been a complete victory. Judge Martinez had listened to Harper's recordings, reviewed the financial evidence, and heard testimony from 3 witnesses who'd observed Claire's suspicious behavior over the past months. When Margot presented the audio of Claire discussing custody arrangements as part of a business scheme, the judge's expression had turned stone cold. "Temporary full custody granted to Mr. Walker," she'd announced. "Supervised visits only for Mrs. Walker pending resolution of ongoing investigations." Claire's lawyer had looked stunned. Claire herself had started crying in the courtroom, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. I'd seen that look before, usually right before she'd say something she'd regret later. But the real victory had come when Margot successfully argued for freezing all disputed business assets. The judge had agreed that allowing continued transfers while federal investigators examined the accounts would compromise any potential criminal prosecution. "Your company's bank accounts are now protected," Margot explained as we left the courthouse. "They can't touch another penny while this plays out." Henry Caldwell had wasted no time filing appeals on every decision. His team of lawyers was probably costing him $50,000 a month, but he had the resources to fight indefinitely. That's when Harper came up with the idea that changed everything. Jordan Keller's annual fundraising gala is tomorrow night, she said during our strategy meeting at her office. 500 donors, local media coverage, and a lot of prominent people who don't know what he's really been up to. What are you suggesting? Public exposure. We've been fighting this battle in courtrooms and conference rooms. Time to take it to the court of public opinion. Carlos looked skeptical. That's a huge risk. If it backfires, we could face defamation lawsuits. Not if everything we present is documented truth, Margot said. I've reviewed the evidence. The recordings are authentic, the financial documents are legitimate, and we have multiple witnesses. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. The Riverside Convention Center was decorated like something out of a political movie. Red, white, and blue everywhere, campaign banners hanging from the ceiling, and a sea of well-dressed donors writing checks to support Jordan Keller's re-election campaign. I felt like I was walking into enemy territory, which I suppose I was. Harper had gotten us tickets through a contact of hers, and we dressed to blend in. Just 3 more supporters eager to hear Jordan talk about his vision for responsible governance. Jordan looked completely at ease behind the podium, delivering his prepared remarks about fiscal responsibility and family values. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was a man who'd been stealing from small businesses and destroying families, lecturing an audience about moral leadership. Our community thrives when we support local businesses and protect working families, he said to enthusiastic applause. That's why I've made regulatory reform a cornerstone of my platform. Harper had prepared a portable speaker system that could connect to her phone via Bluetooth. The plan was simple but risky. Wait for the question and answer portion of the evening, then play the recordings for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan announced after finishing his speech, I'd be happy to take a few questions from the audience. Several people asked typical political questions about tax rates and development projects. Jordan handled them smoothly, like the experienced politician he was. Then Harper stood up in the back of the room. Mr. Keller, can you comment on your relationship with Claire Walker and your involvement in targeting her husband's business? The room went quiet. Jordan's smile never wavered, but I saw his knuckles go white as he gripped the podium. I'm not sure what you're referring to, he said carefully. Perhaps we could discuss this after the event. Actually, I think everyone here should know exactly what kind of man they're being asked to support, Harper said, pulling out her phone. Especially the small business owners in this room who could be your next targets. Security guards started moving toward Harper, but she was faster. The first recording began playing through the speaker, Jordan's voice crystal clear in the silent convention center. Once we trigger the audit, his business will be tied up in legal problems for months. That gives us time to acquire the property through the shell companies. Claire's voice responded, what if he fights back legally? Then we destroy his credibility as a father too. Emergency custody petition, claims of instability, whatever it takes. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Donors started talking all at once, some demanding explanations, others heading for the exits. Local news cameras that had been there to cover a routine political event suddenly had a real story on their hands. Jordan tried to regain control. These recordings are taken out of context. This is clearly a desperate attempt by a disgruntled former constituent to me. Harper played the second recording, the one from the restaurant where Jordan and Claire had discussed the development project and planned my destruction with chilling detail. This time, there was no ambiguity, no room for alternative interpretation. We need to make sure Ethan loses everything: business, kids, reputation. Once he's completely isolated, Daddy can move forward with acquiring the properties. Security finally reached Harper, but the damage was done. Half the audience was already streaming toward the exits, and the news cameras were rolling. Jordan's campaign manager was frantically trying to clear the room, but it was too late. 3 major donors approached me directly as we left the building. If Jordan Keller targeted you, he could target any of us, one of them said. We need to know how to protect ourselves. The local news coverage was devastating for Jordan. By midnight, the recordings were trending on social media platforms, and by morning, calls for his resignation were coming from his own political party. The state attorney general's office announced they were opening an investigation based on the evidence presented at the gala. Margot called me at 7 a.m. with news that made the whole risky gambit worthwhile. Caldwell's lawyers want to negotiate, she said. They're offering to settle all claims against you in exchange for avoiding public testimony about his role in the conspiracy. What kind of settlement? Full withdrawal of all legal actions against you, restoration of your business accounts, and a significant financial payment for damages. Plus, they'll stay away from your property development area permanently. What about criminal prosecution? That's not up to us anymore. The federal investigators are moving forward regardless of any civil settlement. Your recordings gave them everything they needed to build a case. As I hung up the phone, I realized we'd accomplished something I hadn't thought possible a week earlier. We'd turned the tables completely. Instead of being the isolated target of a powerful conspiracy, I was now the protected witness in a federal investigation. The kids were eating breakfast at the cabin's kitchen table, completely unaware that their father had just won the biggest fight of his life. Lucas was building towers with his cereal pieces, and Mia was reading a picture book about brave knights rescuing kingdoms. Looking at them, I understood that the real victory wasn't in the courtroom or at the gala. It was in being able to sit at this table, in this peaceful place, knowing that I'd protected their future and preserved our family. The call came at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, 3 days after Jordan's political career had imploded at the fundraising gala. I was reviewing legal documents with Margot when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Ethan? This is Simon Caldwell, Claire's brother. I need to talk to you. I almost hung up. After everything his family had put me through, the last thing I wanted was another Caldwell trying to manipulate me. But something in his voice stopped me. Desperation, maybe, or genuine fear. What do you want, Simon? To help you stop my father before he destroys more families. Can we meet somewhere private? I have evidence you need to see. Harper and Carlos thought it was a trap. This could be another layer of their strategy, Harper warned. Get you to meet alone, then claim you threatened him, or worse. But Margot disagreed. Simon Caldwell has stayed out of his father's business deals. He runs a small nonprofit and has never been involved in the real estate empire. If he's reaching out, it might be legitimate. We arranged to meet at Riverside Park, in broad daylight with Carlos watching from a distance. Simon looked nothing like his father or sister, thin where they were solid, nervous where they were confident. He carried a manila envelope that looked like it weighed 50 pounds. I should have done this months ago, he said without preamble. But I was scared of what Dad would do to me. What changed? Seeing what he did to you, and your kids. That recording at Jordan's gala. Hearing Claire talk about destroying your family like it was a business transaction. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Simon opened the envelope and spread documents across the picnic table. What I saw made my blood run cold. Photographs of secret meetings between Henry Caldwell and city officials. Email chains discussing regulatory pressure campaigns against specific businesses. Financial records showing payments to inspectors and auditors. Dad's been doing this for years, Simon explained. He identifies properties he wants, researches the current owners, then systematically destroys their businesses to force sales. How many? At least 12 companies over the past 5 years. Maybe more. He keeps detailed files on each target, financial information, personal weaknesses, family situations he can exploit. One photograph showed Henry Caldwell shaking hands with Jordan Keller outside City Hall. Another showed him meeting with the same regulatory official who'd scheduled the audit of my business. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Why are you doing this? I asked. Simon's hands were shaking as he organized the documents. Because I helped him with some of the early research, before I understood what he was really doing. I thought he was just being thorough in his business investments. I didn't realize he was destroying people's lives. What kind of research? Background checks on business owners. Financial analysis of their companies. Personal information about their families. I thought it was legitimate due diligence, but he was using it to find pressure points. The most damaging document was a handwritten confession Simon had prepared, detailing his father's methods and providing specific examples of businesses that had been targeted. It read like a playbook for corporate extortion. This is enough to put your father away for decades, I said. I know. That's why I'm scared. Dad doesn't forgive betrayal, especially from family. We scheduled a meeting with federal investigators for Thursday morning. Simon would turn over all the evidence and provide sworn testimony about his father's criminal enterprise. In exchange, prosecutors would consider immunity for his cooperation. Stay somewhere safe until Thursday, I advised. Don't go home. Don't follow your usual routines. These people have already shown they'll do anything to protect themselves. Simon nodded and carefully repacked the documents. There's something else you should know. Claire's been pushing Dad to escalate things against you. She's convinced him that if you're not completely destroyed, you'll eventually expose everything. What does that mean? I don't know exactly. But Dad's been making calls to people I've never heard him talk to before. People who don't sound like business associates or politicians. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were approaching something dangerous. Harper increased security around the cabin, and Margot advised me to vary my routines and stay in public places whenever possible. Wednesday evening, I was helping the kids with their homework when Carlos called with news that turned my world upside down again. Simon's been in a car accident. Bad one. He's in intensive care at Memorial Hospital. What happened? Single car crash at Elkhorn Ridge, about 20 miles from town. His car went off the road and hit a tree. Police are calling it an accident, but the timing. I felt sick. Elkhorn Ridge was a remote area with winding mountain roads, the kind of place where accidents could happen easily or be made to look like accidents. Is he going to make it? They don't know yet. He's in surgery now. But Ethan, there's something else. His car was searched after the accident. All the documents he was carrying are gone. The federal investigators were furious. Without Simon's testimony in the original documents, their case against Henry Caldwell was significantly weakened. They still had my recordings and the evidence Harper had gathered, but Simon's insider information had been the key to proving the broader conspiracy. We need those documents, Agent Martinez told me during an emergency meeting at Margot's office. Simon's confession detailed specific crimes with dates and locations. Without it, we're looking at a much harder prosecution. What about backups? Copies. Simon was paranoid about digital evidence. He kept everything in hard copy only, worried about his father's connections to tech companies that might help with surveillance. I spent Wednesday night at the hospital, waiting for news about Simon's condition. Claire showed up around midnight, looking genuinely distraught for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He's my little brother, she said, tears streaming down her face. Whatever else has happened between us, I love him. Do you love him enough to help him get justice? Claire looked at me with something that might have been regret. You don't understand the kind of pressure Dad puts on people. The things he's capable of when he feels threatened. Is that a threat? It's a warning. He's not going to stop with Simon. You've made yourself his primary target now, and he has resources you can't imagine. Simon died Thursday morning at 6 a.m. without regaining consciousness. The doctors said his injuries were consistent with a high-speed collision, but the accident investigator found skid marks that suggested he'd tried to brake before hitting the tree. At the funeral, I watched Henry Caldwell play the grieving father perfectly. He gave a touching eulogy about Simon's dedication to helping others and his commitment to family values. Not a single person in that room would have suspected he was mourning the son who'd tried to expose his crimes. But I knew the truth. And looking at Simon's casket, I made a promise that his sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. The evidence might be gone, but Simon had given me something more valuable, the absolute certainty that Henry Caldwell was willing to kill to protect his empire. That knowledge changed everything. This wasn't just about business fraud or political corruption anymore. This was about a man who would murder his own son to avoid accountability. And if he'd kill Simon, he wouldn't hesitate to target me or my children. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The morning I walked into Detective Ray Morrison's office, I carried 3 banker's boxes and a briefcase that contained everything needed to bring down the whole damn network. Morrison was internal affairs, 30 years on the force, and the kind of guy who didn't take bribes or look the other way when politicians got their hands dirty. Harper had connected us after Simon's accident, and Morrison had been quietly building his own case against Jordan Keller's influence peddling. You sure about this, Walker? Morrison asked, eyeing the boxes. His office smelled like stale coffee and old cigarettes, exactly what you'd expect from a cop who'd seen too much corruption. Once we hand this over to the feds, there's no going back. These people have connections. I set the boxes down on his desk with a thud that echoed through the small room. Detective, they tried to destroy my family and my business. They've been stealing taxpayer money and manipulating city contracts. Simon Caldwell is lying in intensive care because he tried to do the right thing. I'm done playing defense. Margot Ellis sat beside me, her legal pad covered in notes. She'd been working around the clock since Simon's accident, preparing for what she called the nuclear option. Detective Morrison, my client has documented evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted witness intimidation. The federal prosecutors are already interested based on the preliminary materials we've shared. Morrison opened the first box and pulled out a manila folder thick with bank statements. Walk me through this again. I leaned forward, pointing to the highlighted transactions. Jordan Keller and Claire set up shell companies to funnel money from city development projects. Look at these deposits. They match exactly with the dates of city council votes on zoning changes. Claire's father, Henry Caldwell, was getting inside information about which properties would increase in value, then buying them through these fake companies. The detective flipped through page after page of financial records. Harper had done incredible work tracking the money trail through offshore accounts and dummy corporations. Every transaction was documented, cross-referenced, and verified through multiple sources. This invoice here, I continued, pulling out another document, shows Caldwell's company billing the city for environmental impact studies that were never completed. The money went straight into Jordan's campaign fund and Claire's personal account. They've been running this scheme for at least 3 years. Morrison whistled low. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $2.7 million in fraudulent contracts and kickbacks, Margot replied. That's just what we can prove. The actual amount is probably much higher. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a digital recorder. But the financial crimes are just the beginning. Play track number 7. Morrison pressed play, and Jordan's voice filled the room. It was from one of the recordings Simon had made before his accident, capturing a conversation between Jordan and Henry Caldwell in Caldwell's private office. We need to accelerate the timeline on Walker. Jordan's voice crackled through the small speaker. The audit pressure isn't working fast enough. Claire's getting nervous about the custody situation. Henry Caldwell's gravelly voice responded. I've got connections at the state level. We can have his business license suspended pending investigation. Make it look like tax evasion. What about the kid situation? Jordan asked. Claire handles that. She's got her story straight about Walker being unstable. With the business troubles, it'll be easy to paint him as a man falling apart. Morrison stopped the recording and looked at me with something between sympathy and anger. They were planning to frame you for tax evasion? That's exactly what they were doing. Harper found the falsified documents they planned to plant in my company files. They had it all worked out. Destroy my business, take my kids, and split the insurance money when the company went under. Margot opened her own briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document. We also have the DNA evidence that proves Lucas isn't Ethan's biological son. Claire has been using that information to manipulate the custody proceedings, but we have recordings of her admitting she deliberately concealed the paternity to maintain financial support. The detective studied the paternity results, then looked at me. How are you handling this part, Walker? I took a deep breath. The DNA results had been like a punch to the gut, but I'd had weeks to process the information. Lucas is still my son in every way that matters. I've raised him for 6 years. Claire used that boy as a weapon, and I won't let her destroy him the way she tried to destroy me. Morrison nodded with respect. What's your timeline for federal delivery? Today, Margot said firmly. We have a meeting with Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh in 2 hours. She's been briefed on the basics and is ready to move forward with formal charges. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a thick folder containing photographs, emails, and financial records that Simon had gathered before his accident. Simon risked everything to get this information. He knew his father and Jordan were criminals, and he couldn't live with staying silent. The night of his accident, he was driving to meet with a federal investigator. Someone ran him off the road. You think it was intentional? Morrison asked. I can't prove it yet, but the timing is suspicious. Simon had called me that afternoon saying he had evidence that would end everything. 6 hours later, he's fighting for his life in the hospital. Morrison closed the boxes and stood up. Walker, I've been doing this job for 3 decades. I've seen corruption at every level. Street cops taking bribes, judges fixing cases, politicians selling votes. But this is different. This is a coordinated effort to destroy an innocent family for financial gain. These people are going down hard. The federal building was downtown, an imposing granite structure that made me feel small as we walked through the security checkpoints. Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of Margot. Mr. Walker, she said, shaking my hand. I've reviewed the preliminary materials your attorney provided. This is exactly the kind of public corruption case our office prioritizes. Walk me through the timeline one more time. For the next 3 hours, we laid out the entire conspiracy. Walsh asked detailed questions about every document, every recording, every financial transaction. Her team of federal investigators took notes and made copies of everything we'd brought. The evidence is compelling, Walsh finally said. We'll need you to testify before a grand jury, probably within the next 2 weeks. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Margot, then back at Walsh. Ma'am, These people try to steal my children and destroy everything I've worked to build. They've corrupted city government and stolen taxpayer money. If testifying helps put them behind bars, I'm ready. Walsh smiled for the first time that afternoon. Mr. Walker, cases like this are why I became a prosecutor. We'll have arrest warrants issued by tomorrow morning. Walking out of the federal building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Margot squeezed my shoulder. Ethan, you did it. Claire and Jordan won't be able to manipulate the system anymore. Henry Caldwell's empire is about to crumble. I thought about Mia and Lucas, probably doing homework at Carlos's house while I fought this battle. They deserved a father who stood up to bullies and fought for what was right. Tomorrow, the news would break about the federal indictments. Claire would probably try one last desperate move to save herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. Margot, I said, let's go get my kids. It's time to start rebuilding our lives. The network was exposed. Justice was coming. And for the first time in months, I believed everything was going to be okay. 6 months after walking out of that federal building, I was standing in the morning sunlight on Main Street in Cedar Falls, watching Mia and Lucas help me hang the sign for our new business. Walker Family Marketing in simple black letters on white, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed for attention. Just honest work in a town where people still knew their neighbors' names. Jordan Keller had resigned from the city council 3 days after the federal indictments came down. The local newspaper ran his mugshot on the front page with the headline, "Fallen Councilman Faces Federal Charges." Seeing that photo gave me more satisfaction than I'd expected. The man who tried to destroy my family was now facing 20 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Henry Caldwell's arrest had been even more dramatic. FBI agents had raided his downtown office building at 6 in the morning, carrying out boxes of evidence while news cameras rolled. His real estate empire was crumbling as federal prosecutors seized assets and froze bank accounts. The man who'd thought he was untouchable was learning that nobody was above the law. But Claire's downfall had been the hardest to watch, not because I felt sorry for her, but because of what it meant for the kids. The family court judge had terminated her parental rights after reviewing the evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Claire had sobbed in the courtroom, claiming she'd been manipulated by Jordan and her father, but the recordings told a different story. She'd been a willing participant in every scheme. "Dad, is it straight?" Mia called out, holding one end of the sign while Lucas steadied the ladder. At 8 years old, she'd grown serious beyond her years, but her smile was coming back more often now. "Perfect, sweetheart," I replied, tightening the last bolt. The sign was simple but solid, just like the new life we were building here in Cedar Falls. Moving to a small town had been Mia's idea. After the court proceedings ended, she looked at me with those wise eyes and said, "Dad, I want to go somewhere nobody knows about all the bad stuff." Lucas had nodded agreement, still processing everything he'd learned about his biological father and the web of lies he'd grown up in. Cedar Falls was exactly what we needed, population 3,200, surrounded by farmland and forests, where the biggest news was usually the high school football team's latest victory. I'd found a small office space above Murphy's hardware store, and within 2 months, I had 3 local clients who needed help with their marketing. Word traveled fast in a small town, and people appreciated honest work. "Mr. Walker?" A voice behind me made me turn around. It was Tom Henderson, who owned the hardware store downstairs. He was carrying a manila envelope and wearing the kind of serious expression that made my stomach tighten. "Morning, Tom. What's on your mind?" He handed me the envelope. "This came for you yesterday. Looks official. Thought you might want it right away." The return address was from the Cedar Falls Community Foundation. I opened it carefully, wondering what kind of paperwork I'd need to deal with now. Instead, I found a letter that made my hands shake. "Dear Mr. Walker," I read aloud, "the Community Foundation has received a substantial donation from the estate of Simon Caldwell, specifically designated for the establishment of a community creative space. Mr. Caldwell's final instructions indicated that you should oversee this project and that it should be named Simon Sanctuary." Mia looked up from organizing my business cards. "Who was Simon, Dad?" I knelt down so I was at her eye level. "Simon was a brave man who helped us when things were really bad. He got hurt trying to do the right thing, and he didn't make it." "Like a hero?" Lucas asked, climbing down from the ladder. "Yeah, buddy. Exactly like a hero." The letter continued with details that made me realize the scope of Simon's final gift. He'd left instructions for a 5,000 square foot community center with art studios, a small theater, and workshop spaces for local kids and families. The donation was enough to cover construction, equipment, and 5 years of operating expenses. But the most remarkable part was Simon's personal note, written in the hospital before he passed away. "Ethan, you showed me that doing the right thing is worth any price. Please use this to help other families stay together and find their creativity. Make sure the kids in Cedar Falls have a safe place to dream." That afternoon, I called a meeting with the town council. Cedar Falls didn't have many public facilities, and the council members were excited about the possibility of a community creative center. Mayor Patricia Williams, a retired teacher in her 60s, practically bounced in her chair when I explained Simon's vision. "Mr. Walker, this is exactly what our young families need," she said. "We have so many talented kids here, but they have to drive 30 miles to find art classes or music lessons." The project became the town's biggest excitement since the new traffic light was installed 2 years earlier. Local contractors volunteered their time, the high school shop class built custom storage units, and families donated supplies. Mia decided she wanted to help with the interior design, drawing floor plans and color schemes that showed remarkable creativity for an 8-year-old. Lucas surprised me most of all. Despite everything he'd learned about his biological father and the circumstances of his birth, he threw himself into helping with the sanctuary project. He spent hours organizing donated art supplies and teaching younger kids how to use the pottery wheels that arrived from Simon's personal collection. "Dad," he said one evening as we were painting the main studio space, "I'm glad you're my real dad, even if we don't have the same DNA." Those words hit me harder than any court victory or federal indictment. Lucas had chosen to stay with me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That was worth more than all the money Caldwell had tried to steal from me. The grand opening of Simon's Sanctuary happened on a perfect Saturday morning in October. Half the town showed up, along with some visitors from the county seat who'd heard about our project. Detective Morrison drove down from the city with his family, and even Margot Ellis made the trip with her 2 daughters. "You did good," Walker, Morrison said, watching kids pour into the art studios. Simon would be proud. Mia had insisted on making the dedication speech. She stood on a small platform in the main hall, wearing her best dress and holding a microphone that was too big for her hands. "This place is for everyone who wants to make something beautiful," she announced to the crowd. "Simon's Sanctuary is where families can be together and create things that matter. My dad says the best way to fix something broken is to build something new and better." As I watched the families exploring the studios, I realized that Mia was right. We hadn't just survived the conspiracy that tried to destroy us. We'd built something meaningful from the wreckage. Jordan was awaiting trial, Caldwell was facing financial ruin, and Claire was fighting her own legal battles. But we were here, together, creating something that would help other families for years to come. That evening, after the last visitors had gone home, I sat in the sanctuary's main hall with Mia and Lucas. The afternoon sun was streaming through the large windows, casting warm light across the art tables and easels. "Dad," Mia said, "I think we're okay now." She was right. We were more than okay. We were home. Story summary. This is a gripping family drama told from the perspective of Ethan Walker, an ordinary American father whose world turns upside down when he discovers his wife's infidelity during what was supposed to be a family retreat. What begins as a personal betrayal quickly escalates into something far more sinister when Ethan uncovers a web of corruption involving local politicians, financial fraud, and a conspiracy designed to destroy his small marketing business. As Ethan fights to protect his 2 children, 7-year-old Mia and 6-year-old Lucas, he finds himself battling not just a cheating spouse, but a network of powerful people who will stop at nothing to silence him. With the help of loyal friends, a sharp attorney, and an unlikely ally from within the corrupt system, Ethan must navigate legal battles, custody fights, and escalating threats while trying to keep his family together. The story explores themes of parental love, moral courage, and the lengths a father will go to protect his children. It's a tale of an ordinary man who discovers extraordinary strength when everything he holds dear is threatened, set against the backdrop of small-town corruption and the abuse of power. Written in a straightforward, authentic voice, the story follows Ethan's journey from devastating personal betrayal to his fight for justice, ultimately becoming a story about rebuilding trust, finding healing, and creating something positive from the wreckage of betrayal. Share your thoughts in the comments. What part of the conspiracy did you find most shocking? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.